It's such a pleasure to have you.
I'm delighted. If you call me Dr. Ulrich, I'll call you Missy Ioli. So it's
Oh, no, no, no.
Dave
Well,
is a much better
all
way to
right.
go.
So
So
we'll go to Dave. All right. Perfect. Thank you. Um, so here's the thing. When I have people on the show, they're always usually so accomplished. And before we read this list of accolades that you've had, and people probably recognize your name, and it almost makes people seem as if they're superhuman and they're not human. So what I always like to start the podcast out is we're finding out a little bit more about the person behind all of that. So because I know as well as you do, and I think most of us know that there's a journey and there's a road to that, to those accolades and those accomplishments, and there's a person behind it. So can you tell us a little bit about who Dave Ulrich is and a little bit about your journey to get to where you are today?
it's an interesting question, and I read those accolades and I go, "Who the heck is that?" So I'm going to answer it in a little bit different way. I have 3 kids and we have 10 grandkids. I
Oh,
think if you were to ask one of our grandkids who are 8 or 9, and we're going to see him tonight, tell me about your grandpa. It's an interesting question. What would they say?
yeah.
I think they'd say, "Oh, my grandpa is married to grandma. She's great." That's the first thing they'd say. We've been married for a long time. Um, Grandpa likes to hang out. He comes over and he likes to eat and he likes to play games.
Wow.
That's a very bizarre introduction.
No, it's not a bizarre introduction. It says a lot about where you are and what's important, right? So I love it. And so how true do you think that is? That's what I'm hearing is fun loving. I'm hearing someone who likes to learn. I'm hearing imagination. I'm hearing all of those things in what you just described.
Well, I hope that's what our grandkids see. I mean, and I hope they see that we're loving and kind. And if this video, I'll show the picture. Ha, that's the
Oh,
grandkids.
oh,
And
wow. Well, I think you bring up such a good point here in this cute introduction that you brought up that I think is very profound. And what it is that continuously, so you have all these achievements, et cetera, but how you're showing up every single day as a leader, as a grandpa, as a husband, as a father, and all of those things matter. And that's what I'm hearing. And that it's not so far fetched and it's not so far from our conversation that we're going to have about leadership today.
that's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot. Who's one of your favorite, go back in history, leaders that it could be an academic, it could be a scholar, it could be an author, it could be a person. Who comes to mind? Just a man or a woman, just a leader that you would admire?
Somebody I admire their work, Carl Jung.
Carl Jung. Would it have been cool? I mean, here's this famous
Yeah.
psychologist, obviously.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it have been cool not just to read what he wrote? Because what we write is somewhat scripted. As you
Yeah.
know, when you write it, I have an editor who helps me
Exactly.
and she makes it read well and all those good things. Wouldn't it have been cool to have a glimpse into how he really processed daily living? That's what I think LinkedIn begins to give us.
Yeah.
I've decided to say, I'm going to comment every day.
Right.
I'm going to let people kind of see into what I'm living with. And you're in my office.
Right.
Never got inside, Peter
Right.
Drucker. I'd love to. Peter Drucker, is your desk messy or clean?
Yeah.
What are you reading? What's on your desk that you're reading? What's top of mind on your desk? I'm trying to see what's top of mind on my desk. It's not impressive at all. Well, my family picture is top of mind.
Right.
um, and a quote from my grandma. That's the coolest thing, just to share me. My grandmother was born in 1890, and we found some books that she had a week ago, and she had quotes.
Oh my goodness.
And so it's so fun to see this
Yeah.
legacy, this heritage that I didn't know her when she was 30.
Right.
Uh, some of the quotes are just breathtaking. One of the quotes, and I'm going to get it a little wrong, but make sure you listen to people who disagree with you because they will be people you learn from.
Wow.
In 1920.
Wow.
That,
Wow.
I mean, and so I hope what you're able to do in your podcast is get below the written word, the TED Talk, the scripted, the video, the movie. What's really going on behind that? And to me, that's where I think life really comes alive. is how do we look when we're not scripted, and how do we think when we're not scripted?
That's what exactly why I asked you the question, at
Yeah.
the very beginning, is like, who is Dave Ulrich? Because we have this image of who Dave Ulrich is based on your books, based on your work, and you become larger than life, and you also become, like I said, like a superhuman that people don't know the reality behind the person. I will tell you, just recently, you talk about who you admire, etc. I had the privilege of meeting someone that I had admired from afar, and the experience meeting the person was not at all the same as me as I had imagined, right? Because this person would write a lot about things regarding emotional intelligence and empathy, etc. But my experience of the person was very different than that.
And so so I'm going to ask you, what's something you did? We're interviewing midday today. What's something you did
So
this
I'm
morning?
being interviewed. Yes,
You are. That's
I
cool.
love it.
That's why this is fun.
Abel's turn today. Right.
Well, my commitment is to learn. So
Right.
what's something you did in the last 7 or 8 hours since you've been up that that tells me a little bit about you? Anything?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I've been preparing for these interviews because I tape these interviews during the day, all day today. So I've been one after the other. But the funny thing is, I was laughing to myself because I was noticing. Okay, so I have this jacket on. And for those of you that can see the video, because this is a podcast, but I'm wearing a jacket because we're videotaping it. And so below my jacket, I have my sweats on, I have my slippers on. So, but I was like, okay. So there's the image, and then there's the really behind the scenes running around trying to get my dog taken care of this morning, and running around trying to do that. So the reality is we're all human, and I think that's the picture that you're trying to paint here.
And I think that's part of leadership today. I think in a technology enabled world, it's one of those fascinating theories of paradox. We're more isolated. You're in an office, I'm in an office, but we're also more intimate. You can see my office. You're able to ask me about. I think it's so cool. Janet chased her dog. So Janet, how do you manage complexity in your personal life? How does that help you then manage the leadership complexity that
chaos?
And I think that kind of glimpse into the realities of leadership is that it's not a scripted talk. It's a demonstrated life. And I think we see that, ironically, we see it both less and more in remote work, because it's less because we're not in the office chatting, right? But it's more because we get a glimpse into people's lives. Again, this is podcast, not video, but behind my office or people that have influenced me. And I love that kind of lens as we look at leaders. And when I coach leaders, I love to start by saying, let me get to know you a little bit more personally so that I can see what's behind some of the behaviors and systems and styles that you lead with. So thank you for letting us glimpse into your muddled life with dog and casual clothes.
So I will ask you the same question. So what were you doing before?
Well, I was thinking, I mean, I haven't had this on a podcast before. Yeah. I'll just go through. I'll be honest. Yeah. I got up in the morning. I decided I happen to have everybody has their own source of meaning and purpose. Right. And for me, I find it in scripture. So I reread the Sermon on the Mount, which I think is the greatest talk of all time. It has almost nothing to do in some ways with Christianity. It has to do with principles of living. The meek shall inherit the earth. So I read that this morning. My wife came out and talked, and we talked about our grandkids and they're coming and how we made beds for our grandkids today. And then I had a meeting with a client who's using a new service we're offering, which is really exciting. I am so excited about some of the work we're doing. And they told us some things that were good and bad. And then I did some exercise watching. I exercise on my treadmill or elliptical, watching things to distract. So either a basketball game or Saturday Night Live.
That's funny. That's
so
hilarious.
There you got to know a little bit about
right. So there's the person who actually watches Saturday Night Live and who is making their grandkids' bed. So there you go. Right. So I think this notion that we're talking about, because I think it's so important, is this human part of leadership. And you've written so many books, you've talked about leadership, you've got so many different facets around leadership. I too am the same way in terms of when I meet someone, the first thing I do is I want to know about them. and I want to know a little bit more deeply about them, like what a turning point was in their life, etc. And even when we're doing assessment tools or anything, even when we're giving people feedback, because no person is the same.
Nice.
And nor are they operating in the same exact context. And so I think you're understanding the person, but you're also understanding the context they're operating in. Can you talk a little bit about, so now I'm going to get a little bit more heady on you, but what do you think is what are the biggest challenges right now and in the future that leaders are starting to face that we're going to need to be able to rise up to as leaders?
Well, now I'm stumped again with your comment. Who's a great figure in history? There's so many, but I love simplicity. To get into my academic background, my PhD decades ago was at UCLA, not UC Irvine, by where you live,
Right.
in something called numerical taxonomy. And I always say, if you know what that is, I'm so sorry.
I have no idea.
But the idea is so powerful. If you go to a restaurant, imagine the menu had 80 items with no order. Here's a drink, here's a dessert, here's a salad, here's a soup, and there's no organization. You wouldn't know how to order. What it does is you have drinks, appetizers, main courses, coffees, etc. That's called taxonomy. It's taking a whole things that could be complex and puts a discipline around them. That's my life in a nutshell, is that I do that through statistics and math. So what's the classification? What's the simple way to figure out what leadership is about? And I'll go very simple and then I'll go mid-range. So I love to say, when I talk to leaders and they say, okay, Dave, I can, you've published books, people have done studies, you've got research. Tell me one thing I should know. Boy, that's tough. That's what you ask. Mm-hmm. Here it is. How often does someone leave an interaction with you feeling better or worse about themselves? Again, that's really simplistic. It's subjective. Wow. But I have met with some of those folks that that are, the quote big names, and I leave feeling, geez, they made me feel stupid because they're so smart. I've left with other of those folks who go, wow, that's a great individual. They helped me learn. And behind that question are two or three principles. Number one, leadership is not about you. Yeah. It's about how people interpret what you do. When I give my wife a gift, who defines the value? She does. Value is not what you do, it's what somebody gets. A lot of people talk about the leader. I like to talk about leadership because good leaders create the next generation of leadership. Parents are successful when they create the next generation of progeny. I'm so grateful for a mother and a father who created in my sister and I skills that are different from them. And so, how often does somebody leave a meeting with you feeling better or worse about themselves? I was in a meeting this week with somebody, and it was a little tense discussion. That's happened. Not the first or last time. And I immediately go, Dave, stop. Your job is to make sure that that person leaves feeling better about themselves. Now, even if it's tough, I'll give one quick example. I'm coaching a leader, and big company, I won't name the company, that would be inappropriate, but big company, global company, and an employee made a huge mistake. This company and this leader had a predisposition, we all have them, of being very direct, which is part of leadership at times. And terrible methodology, but they did a lot by email because of global stuff. And so he drafted an email. And I said, before you send your next email, contact me. Sent me a note. Dave, this person made a huge mistake. I don't even know what it was. Here's the email. You made a huge mistake. It's going to cost us millions of dollars. If you can't fix it and get better, you'll be fired. And I quickly wrote back and I said, I'm going to add three things. I care about you. You have great potential at this company. You made a huge mistake. It's going to cost us a lot of money. Don't hide from that. But then number three, what did you learn from it so that we can get better? Now, to me, that's the kind of thing. How does somebody leave an interaction feeling better about themselves? You still made a big mistake. Leadership is not abdication, because that is leadership. Are you helping people leave an interaction feeling better or worse about themselves?
I so resonate, and I'm sure people are resonating with that. The better about yourself, because we all can think of people that we've interacted with, leaders, educators, in our schools, spouses, right? Yeah,
children,
parents, right? I mean, we can go down the gamut. Do you think people can make you feel a certain way?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think they can set a context, but I think ultimately we control how we respond. So a leader who is rather abrupt with me, if I get behind what are they trying to do? Why are they being abrupt? What's behind their motivation? I happen to be married, if you're seeing the visual, to a wonderful psychologist whose picture is on my mantle. And she said, Dave, when you work with people, understand where they're coming from. Not just, don't judge them by their behavior, judge them also by their intent and heritage. And most people I know, I mean, you've run into the others exceptions,
Right.
have pretty good intent.
Yeah.
Uh,
I agree with you. That is my experience as well. But I'm going to ask you this because I think this is so relevant to what we're talking about. So we're talking about people, and that's the major focus of what we're talking about. And yet in organizations, right, there's the task that needs to be done. There's the knowledge I have, so my competence, and also the tasks I have to do. And often what I've seen, and I work with a lot of people who are very talented at what they do, but have either never really learned how to deal with people
nice.
or how to work with people or understand people. I mean, they don't, and it's not because they don't like people. It's just they haven't focused. You know how we build muscles, right? We build a muscle. I've been working on my muscle of being really good at whatever it is I do, but I've never exercised the other muscle.
Great comment. Great comment. You know, you
Right? What do you
mentioned,
think about that? I
I love it.
mean,
You mentioned Carl Jung. What was his stuff? It was those who've done Myers-Briggs. It was duality. It was managing multiple things.
right,
In today's language, and what's fun is today is not all new.
right,
Paradox. So
right,
one of the things we found, now we're getting into some of the skills of leadership. First thing we find, and I love research because it gives us insight that we may not have gleaned.
right.
Are leaders born or bred, nature or nurture? We've had that debate. Myers-Briggs, are you an introvert or an extrovert? And the research is actually pretty clear. It's about 50-50. Half of who I am is predicted on my ancestry, my DNA. As your listeners get older, look in the mirror and see your same gender parent looking back and just scare the heck out of you. Dad, go away, or you go
No,
away,
no way that's happening,
go
right?
away. But it is.
Uh,
Or if you have a son or a daughter, ooh, I'm not quite able to do that because my grandkids aren't old enough. But when my son was 15, I said, look at me, look at your grandfather behind me. That's your future. And he screamed, no, no. So half is predisposed, is there, and the other half is nurture. You can learn it. So what does that mean? There are skills that we should be aware of as what I love to call predispositions. I'm predisposed to certain things, and I may be predisposed to task, to results, to accomplishment. I grew up with that. It's part of my heritage. It's my DNA. The other half you can learn. And so I'm going to put two thoughts together. One is we found that the most successful leaders navigate paradox. They know how to manage the tensions.
yeah,
I mean, I just use an example. The meek shall inherit the earth. If I
right,
use that
right.
out, the servant, the master should be the servant. I mean, this is not a new concept. Whether you believe in Jesus, however, this was a great teacher whose ideas have affected billions of people. Most of his teachings were paradoxes. And how do you find your personal way in those paradoxes? Which I think is fun. So, to a leader who has a predisposition to task, because that's their nature, I love to say, where did that come from? My dad, my mom, the leaders I admire, my early experience. I'm more focused on task. Good. There's another side of that guardrail, which is people. Let's learn it. What does it mean to care for people? What are the questions you ask? What are the experiences you need? I think everybody can learn to navigate those inherent tensions that Jung and others talked about that show up in our world today. What's the best thing you can ever give an employee in a company? Believe, belong, become, breathe. I like your B. Breathe, stay alive. And they say, oh, all the above. I say, wrong. The best thing you can give an employee in a company is a company that succeeds. If your company doesn't succeed in the marketplace, there is no purpose. There is no experience.
There's
There
no
is no
company.
learning.
There's no
Company.
job.
There's
Right.
no job.
Right.
And I've worked in some great companies, incredible companies, Sears, Toys R Us, Enron, Kodak, Digital Equipment way back. They don't exist because those companies had great people practices, but they weren't aligned to what the market required. What am I doing to create value for someone else? Does someone leave an interaction feeling better about themselves? That applies to the organization. Pick a company, Cigna, Northrop Grumman. Are we doing things inside the company so that our customers and investors and communities outside will continue to find value from our service? That affects hiring, it affects training, it affects compensation. That's the line, and it affects that paradox. Right. We want you to navigate the inside and the outside, the task and the people. That's the work that we try to help people get their arms around.
And so it sounds simple, right? And we know that it's not that simple, because navigating paradox is not a simple task. It's not a simple endeavor, right? Because you've got to hold two things at the same time.
Have you ever messed up something and just go, how can I have done that? All the time. I had a call. We're trying to promote some ideas for our research. Doesn't matter what it is. We had a call recently and we had an hour and we spent 45 minutes telling people what we knew. And when I was done, I called my partner. I said, how stupid are we? This is a paradox. We know stuff, but we should have started with, what do you need?
Right.
Because value is not what we know, it's what they need. And how do we help them meet their goals? Right. And he said, Dave, collectively, we're pretty old and we're really stupid.
I mean, and I'm going to pause there for a second because I'm going to grab onto that. What do you think that the driver is for that? Why is it that we're always trying to sell or tell people what we know rather than being curious, right? So we've got opinion. It's here's my opinion. It's here's how smart I am. Here's what I know. Here's how I can solve your problem versus the curiosity that's needed to really understand and shape the context.
We need to have Carol Dweck on around growth mindset.
Yeah,
I mean, it's right. That's a great question. For me, I can't answer for you. I'd love to hear your answer. Yeah. For me, two things. One, I really like what we do, and I think selling it is convincing people, and that's a false positive. And two, probably some insecurities. Mm-hmm. They may not like it, so I got to tell them how good it is. So I thought about this experience recently. I thought, why did I do that? Why didn't I stop and say, before we go any further, here's the area we're interested in. What are your questions? What's the challenge you're wrestling with? Why didn't I do that? Because I'm so excited about our answer. Well, I don't even know their question.
Yeah.
And then maybe my insecurity that I'm afraid my answer is not the right one. I don't know.
I'm going to take what you just said because I'm translating what you just said to organizations and some of the things that I've observed in organizations and with leaders. It's really interesting. Talking one-on-one to leaders, I think sometimes people feel like they've got to be all-knowing.
Yeah.
And that they can't show vulnerability and that I have to have all the answers. I talk to some leaders who are, I know everything. I mean, and so they'll say, oh no, but I don't know enough. And I'm like, so what's your team for? And it's like, there's no way you're going to know everything.
I love it.
And so you talk about the insecurity. I think there's a conditioning that happens is that when we get into these leadership roles, that all of a sudden we are the all-knowing and we have to know everything. And the admission of not knowing or the joint problem solving seems to be, that's admitting that I'm not as strong. Or it's going back to the archetype of the strong leader who is all-knowing and is going to save the world, the savior complex or whatever it is, right?
And that doesn't help. And I'm trying to process that in my life, and then hopefully our listeners, I'll join you in this episode. So this morning I wake up and I go, I've got to write a column. I post every Tuesday on LinkedIn. It's now Friday. I've got 3 days to get a post ready. That's not easy to do. And so what I say is, okay, in the last 2 or 3 days, in comments on LinkedIn, I've had a couple of podcasts, I've had 5 webinars, I've had interactions. What am I sensing that people are worried about that they're not even expressing? That's an interesting question. I call them my idea friends. So I say, idea friends, I wish I could sit in your seat sometime and just listen to people. What are they sensing? What's not even being said that you could listen to? Anyway, I love that concept of just curiosity, even if you're not with someone. I have a little book. I'll show you. When I did an in-person talk last week, there was a lunch talk, and then after the lunch, I spoke. But while they were at lunch, I went around to every table and said, what's on your mind? What are you worried about?
Yep.
Just top of mind. I'm going to be speaking after lunch. I got great stuff. And I started with that. I said, this is what you just told me is on your mind. Let me share with you some ideas that might help you with those issues.
Right.
To me, that's what good leaders, I hope, I am modeling what I'm encouraging leaders to do.
Yeah, but right there, what you just said, think about how scary that is.
Oh.
Right? Because the scripts that go through someone's mind as they're trying to prove themselves, right, as a leader, that I'm competent, that I have the ability, that I'm worthy. I mean, it goes back to some deep-seated things. I mean, your wife's a psychologist, right? I mean, there's such a big part of that.
And it's pursuit of perfection rather than learning.
Right.
Let me give you an example. I teach at Michigan. I teach in the executive program. So we do a 2-week HR executive program.
Right.
I do a day on talent. For a long time, I scripted it. Here's my 50 slides. Here's the 10 skills of talent. Here's what I love to do now. Every one of you have talent struggles that you've got either personally in your company or that you've seen. Take 5 minutes, write down your own case study. Let's share them. We got 25 people. We got 10 or 15 on the board. They cluster into 3 to 4 categories. Let's vote. Here's 10 talent challenges. Which are the priorities? We're now in a 5-hour day. We're 30 minutes into it. And I say, okay, that's our agenda for the next 4.5 hours, one at a time.
Yeah.
And I say that to my faculty friends, and they say, well, what's the case study? And I say, the case study is the 25 people in the room. What's your PowerPoint? There is no PowerPoint. The PowerPoint is what's in my head.
Right.
And I've got some ideas.
Right.
Or what we'll co-create. Or
co-create. That's the word. That is the word.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people are. Well, I don't know people. That's a general word.
Many of us.
That's what we're
me.
so
We.
I was going to say we are so afraid of.
Yeah.
Is that we're not trusting that ability to co-create, and that we've got to be the all-knowing source, which is not always. I mean, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. And it's transformation, at least what I've seen in the class that I do as well, is that when transformation happens, it's when it's co-created.
I love it. I love it.
Right?
I've done that.
That's what you're saying. I mean,
my faculty friends say you're crazy.
Right.
I'll give you an example. A few months ago, a year ago, somebody said, we're doing a lot of work in China with a multinational that's not Chinese based. We're trying to hire Chinese nationals. We don't know how to retain the Chinese. And I'm going, neither do I. How many in the group have worked in China? Well, 6 or 7 of them have.
Right.
What worked? What didn't? How many no Chinese nationals? 15 of them have. What worked? Good. Here's some theory about retention, because I know some of that and they do. Right. What did you learn? And after a 30 to 40-minute discussion, we go, wow, I just learned something about retaining Chinese nationals in a multinational company. I didn't even know I was going to go there today. Now, for me personally, you said, what's Dave Ulrich? That's cool.
Right.
That's really cool.
Well, that's transformational.
Yeah. I like that word. Yeah.
It really is, because and it's interesting, because this is the piece I think relates so much to leadership that we're talking about, is that you've got to let go. It's almost a surrender, right? Of being in control. It's that reactive tendency of being the smartest person in the room, being the person that's the all-knowing, that's going to impart knowledge, and drawing on that energy. And I use that word a lot. And I know it sounds sometimes it sounds a little ethereal, but it's not at all ethereal. It's drawing on that collective energy, because we all are energy, to co-create something that is much better than it was. I mean, that is the essence of leadership.
2 4-word questions.
Yeah.
1, what do you want? By the way, some people say, well, I want to get promoted 3 times in the next 5 years. Well, that's not going to happen unless you go start your own company, and then you can change your title every 2 years. Right. I mean, that's not going to happen.
Right.
And so I think getting people clear about their wants and their skills and their desires and reality and expectations. The second one I love to coach leaders on is when somebody comes with a problem, more often than not, that person has thought about the problem more than I have, or more than a leader has.
Right. What
do you want? 4 words. What do you think? What do you think? And so suddenly it's not, I'm here to solve your problem. What do you think? And sometimes they're thinking maybe wrong.
Right.
Well, I think we should do this. Well, have you considered what
Right.
else could we do? So leader is not abdication. That's that paradox that Janet, you said so beautifully. You just gave one. I do need to be in charge and I do need to enable others. And if I'm too much enabling, I just say, okay, groupthink, whatever you want to
Right.
do, go do.
Exactly.
No,
Exactly.
that's just stupid too. That's not leadership. But I've got to be able to navigate that tension and not live on either one of those guardrails.
Yeah.
It's an art, not a science.
But there's something about, and I'm sure having a psychologist for a wife probably helps you in this area, but I'm sure there's something about your own self-mastery that is so important about in this.
When you end a coaching session, I almost always end with the question, what are you doing to take care of yourself? Mm-hmm. And the answers are so different. Some are physical, nutrition, exercise, quite often, nutrition, exercise, diet, sleep. Some of them are hobbies. Some of them are technology. I turn off technology. And here's the line I say to them, unless and until you can take care of yourself, it's going to be hard to care for others. Yeah. People draw on your energy, and you have to give them energy at times as a leader. You have to have a full reservoir so they can draw on it. So I almost always end my sessions with, what are you doing to take care of yourself? And how can you then use that resource to care for others?
And you use the word care, and there's a piece of that that's in there. And and so I love that. I love that you bring that up. Wow, Dave, I could talk to you all day. I can't believe the time is going by so quickly. So I'm gonna summarize a little bit, a couple other questions for you. We're in a world that is tumultuous right now, and people are looking for leadership. They're also trying to figure out how to lead. There's so many different things emerging in organizations, right? There's the talent is changing, the way we work is changing, technology is changing. The tools that we used to use are different, right? The way we look at things are different, multi-generational, diverse workplaces. I mean, everything is shifting. So what advice would you give to organizations and to leaders who are looking to reinvent their organizations, reinvent the way they lead, to meet the moment?
I was coaching a brilliant leader who had two sons, late teens. Chris, do you know where your sons are going to go to college? Not for sure. Do you know what they're going to study? Not for sure. Do you know who they're going to marry? Not for sure. Do you know their life pattern? Not for sure. I mean, everything you just described, I'm now putting into something any of us who've had personal lives recognize. You don't know the future, the uncertainty, and you just said technology, demographics, all the uncertainty. And he said, wow. And I said, so Chris, tell me what you know for certainty about how you'll feel about your sons. And every time I remember that experience, it strikes me. We have 3 children and 10 grandchildren. Dave, what do you know for certainty about your children? I will love them. I will be there for them. Now, if you haven't had teenagers yet, they'll test you. So my advice to a leader, what are you certain about? What are you certain about? And that begins to get to those core values. What is that identity you want to be known for? What is your identity? What is it you want? And no matter what happens, we're going to have recession. We're going to have inflation. We're going to have downsizing. We're going to have growth. We're going to have political quagmire. I don't care. What do you know you will do in that setting? So I think finding certainty in the midst of uncertainty is a real challenge. And I can even tell you where that came from. I talked about myself being vulnerable. A year and a half ago, my wife and I were in the process of transition with a whole bunch of parts of our lives as grandparents and as employees and a whole bunch of stuff. And it hit us. We don't know what the next 12 months is going to bring. I mean, Janet, is your show going to explode? Is it going to shrink? I know it's going to grow, but I don't actually know what's going to happen to my health, what's going to happen to my family, blah, blah, blah. And finally, I sat down and I said, Wendy, what do we know for sure? For me, and I hope everybody has their own answer, don't take mine. I'm committed to learning. If I fail, if I succeed, I'm going to learn. And I'm also committed to learning that I hope will help other people get better. So that's mine. That's not yours. That's not anybody else's. But the question is, in that unknown future, what are you certain about?
And that's an anchor,
Yeah.
right? It anchors and grounds us. And I think that's what we're looking for, is grounding and anchoring. When you have that sense of grounding, it's internal. That's an internal grounding you're talking about.
Nice.
It doesn't put you off kilter. It reminds me of Viktor Frankl, right?
Great
That
work.
the stimulus, we can't control the stimulus, right? The things that come at us, but what we do have control over is our response, the space, right? The pause.
And that anchor is not an albatross. Somebody said, well, that limits the ability to change. No, that creates the ability to change.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great conversation. And by the way, mine would be very similar to yours, is learning as
Really?
well. Is
Okay.
the continuing, like everything is learning, everything. So right now, today, I learned so much from you, and I know our listeners did, because your wisdom just kind of permeated through the mic. Really appreciate you being here today, Dave, and sharing your wisdom with us.
You're
And
very smart.
here's to continuous learning.
Thank you very much. Thank you. What a delightful learn. I'm leaving feeling better about myself.